Right. We're deep diving Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert M. Pirsig. Now, this book isn't your typical self-help. It follows a story of a father and son and their problems with the motorcycle. This book definitely provokes some deep thought into its messages. So, lucky for you, we're going to dive into the 10 core lessons that this book reveals. You don't usually lose your mind chasing a definition, but Robert Pirsig did. He asked one question, what is quality? And followed it so far it broke his personality in half. One part of him, Phaedrus, wanted perfect truth, razor sharp logic and no compromise. The other part, just a father on a road trip with his son, was trying to keep the engine running. This book isn't about Zen, and it isn't about motorcycles. It's about something much harder to explain. Why modern life feels split, why people hate their work, why we want to run from the systems we depend on, and why brilliance often isolates and care resonates. At the core of all this is one undefinable thing: quality. Robert Pirsig rewires everything from how you solve a problem to how you hold yourself together when things start to crack. We'll follow Pirsig's original trail, not interpret it. This video covers lessons that directly come from Pirsig's ideas that he lived, taught, and broke under the weight of. We're going to talk about why we're trapped between logic and feeling, the answer that destroyed a mind and built a new one, why caring is more important than talent, what a machine can teach you about peace, the real path to insight, what happens when you think too clearly, how Pirsig reframed reality, why school fails even when it works, what you're really afraid of when the car won't start, and what it looks like when the parts finally fit. Then we'll close with the message Pirsig left behind, one simple instruction for building a good life, even when the road breaks down. The book's first lesson focuses on why we're trapped between logic and feeling. Pirsig says you have to understand why the world seems so split in the first place. He calls it the conflict between two ways of seeing, the classical and the romantic. The classical is a rational, structural, focused on how things work with of seeing things, and the romantic is an aesthetic, emotional, and focused on how things feel. Most people live locked inside just one of these lenses. And the more you over-identify with one, the more alienated you become from others, from your work, and eventually from yourself. The narrator in the book opens with a scene riding across the American West with his son, Chris. They're joined by friends John and Sylvia Sutherland. John rides a BMW motorcycle. He paid a premium for it. He also refused to learn anything about how it works. When the engine starts acting up, the narrator suggests a fix. But John is offended by this. He doesn't want his pristine German machine patched with some kind of garbage. To Pirsig, this isn't about mechanical skill. It's a window into a core divide. John sees the motorcycle as an experience. Pirsig sees it as a system. John is the romantic. He wants to enjoy the ride, not ruin the magic by understanding the engine. Pirsig is the classical. He wants to understand why the engine is misfiring, not pretend the problem doesn't exist. Most people pick one of these lenses and dig in. Romantic types see technical details as lifeless. They admire beauty, spontaneity, and the moment. But they tend to panic when systems break because they don't understand how to fix them. The classical type are obsessed with control. They analyze, optimize, and debug, but they often lose the point of what they're doing or stop feeling anything at all. They become mechanical themselves. The split runs through careers, relationships, self-image, and even parenting. We either lean into vibe or we demand explanation. We chase beauty or we chase function. We don't trust the other side. What Pirsig is doing is diagnosing a civilizational fracture, a huge split between a classic culture and a romantic counterculture, he calls it, and the two sides are barely speaking to each other. Both lenses offer relief. Romantics get to avoid responsibility. If the bike breaks down, then That's someone else's problem. If life gets messy, it must be the system's fault. Classics get to avoid vulnerability. If you know how everything works, you don't have to admit confusion. If you can control a system, you don't have to feel anything about it. But both approaches eventually fail. Pirsig writes, when analytics thought, the knife is applied to experience. Something is always killed in the process. That which is cut, kills. The romantic view can't survive breakdown. The classic view can't feel aliveness. And people who lean too hard in either direction end up delusioned, angry, or numb. Pirsig doesn't say pick the better lens. He says the split is a problem itself. What we need, he argues, is a way to seeing that transcends that division. A third position, not a compromise, but a unifying force. That unifying force is what he calls quality. But before he can introduce it, we have to sit in the discomfort of this divided world. The split between classical and romantic way of knowing is not just an intellectual puzzle. It's the root of burnout, fear, and technology. Shallowed rebellion, deepened professionalism, and the alienation that most people can't quite name. This is the disease. In the next lesson, we'll start to understand the cure. The second lesson begs the question, what is quality? Robert Pirsig didn't invent motorcycles. He didn't invent Zen. He didn't invent the split between classical and romantic thinking. What he did invent, or rather uncover, is something modern thought has abandoned. A way of seeing reality through the lens of quality. This wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't a motivational slogan, and it wasn't some spiritual abstraction. Quality, for Pirsig, was real. More real than objects, more fundamental than thoughts, more important than truth. But to prove that point, he had to go so deep into it that it nearly erased him. It starts with a question he asked while teaching rhetoric at a university. What is quality? Not in a general sense, but in a precise, experience-based sense that drives our decisions. Why we don't recognize when something is well done. Why can you tell the difference between a good sentence and a bad one before you can explain why? And why does one solution feel right even though you don't know how to justify it? He asked his students this question and they couldn't answer. Then he asked himself, and he couldn't either. This wasn't a gap in vocabulary, it was a philosophical black hole. The more he tried to define quality, the more it slipped away. Every time he tried to pin it down, to turn it into a subject or an object or a rule, it died. Eventually, after tearing apart every angle he could find, Pirsig realized something. Quality isn't an attribute. It's not something a thing has. It's not in the subject. It's not in the object. It comes before both. In his words, quality is the event at which the subject becomes aware of the object. And the moment of recognition, before you split the world into me and that, when you feel a line of dialogue click but can't explain why, when a machine sounds off but you haven't identified the part yet, when a sunset stops you cold before you think beautiful. That moment, that's quality. It's pre-intellectual, pre-verbal, pre-everything. And once you've seen it, you've realized it's the foundation of value itself. This is where the trouble starts. If quality comes before subject and object, if it can't be measured or defined or reduced, then it cannot be analyzed using traditional logic. And that makes it dangerous. It threatens science because it says value is more fundamental than fact. It threatens academy because it refuses to be categorized. It threatens rational identity because it suggests you don't fully choose what you care about, you recognize it. Pirsig wrote, quality is not an object, it's not a subject, it's not a thing, and if you try to make it one, you kill it. But if you don't define it, how can you teach it? How can you discuss it? This was the paradox that consumed him, and the more he wrestled with it, the more isolated he became. In the book, this journey into quality became personified in Phaedrus, the name Pirsig gives his past self. Before his mental breakdown, Phaedrus believed so deeply in the reality of quality that he rejected everything else. He stopped giving grades. He said that they had no quality. He stopped teaching by the book. He said it blocked quality. And he stopped trying to fix it into an academic mold because the mold excluded the very thing that made life worth living. Eventually, this conviction became obsession. He started to believe that the whole structure of Western thought, going back to Aristotle, was built on the wrong foundation. It elevated logic above value, demanded proof before intuition. It threatened what mattered as less important than what can be measured. In response, Phaedrus rejected it all. And then this caused his mind to fracture. Most people think value comes after understanding. You analyze something, then decide if it's good. Pirsig says it's the opposite. You feel something is good, and then try to explain why. That means your experience is ahead of your analyst. But most systems, from school to science to self-help, don't trust experience. They ask you to prove, define, and justify. And quality won't be justified. It shows up when it wants. It can't be bottled. And if you overhandle it, it dies. That's why Pirsig insists on leaving it undefined. Because defining it puts your intellect above it. And once you do that, it's no longer alive. It's just label. Even though Pirsig won't define it, he does describe what it feels like. You feel gumption, a rising energy to act. You feel connected to your task, and you feel present, totally absorbed in what you're doing. Finally, you feel right, even if you can't explain it. And over time, you notice that things with quality pull you towards them and hold your attention and make you care. So while quality can't be named, it can be sensed. It lives in your decisions, your craftsmanship, and your relationships. Pirsig says, you don't invent quality, you respond to it. Most people try to fix themselves by optimizing routines, installing habits, or following systems. Pirsig flips that. He says, start noticing what has quality, not what's popular, not what's efficient, not what's approved, but what pulls you into attention, what lights you up, what makes you care for real. And when you find it, protect it, because the mind will try to strangle it with definition. In the next lesson, we'll explore the thing that protects quality and the thing that kills it. It's not talent, it's not knowledge, it's something much simpler. Gumption. Lesson 3 explains why caring is more important than talent, with a focus on the feeling of gumption. If quality is real, if it's something you recognize before you can define it, then a new question shows up. Why do we lose touch with it? Why do some people stay lit up by their work while others slowly burn out? Why do you start a project with excitement and end up resenting it halfway through? Pirsig says he has a word for this, for the invisible force that keeps you going when everything feels right, gumption. And when you lose it, that's when everything falls apart, even if you're smart, experienced, or doing everything right. Pirsig calls it the inner fuel that makes a task feel worth doing. If you're going to repair a motorcycle, an adequate supply of gumption is the first and most important tool. It's not talent, it's not discipline, it's not willpower. It's something more instinctive, a kind of momentum that builds when you're aligned with the task. When you care, the outcome connects with your attention in the moment. You can't fake gumption, you can't download it, and if you try to push through it without wanting it, and if you try to push through without it, things start to crack. Pirsig says most people don't lose motivation randomly. They lose it by falling into what he calls a gumption trap. These are conditions, external or internal, that quietly drain your enthusiasm and make you forget what you were aiming for. He breaks them into 2 types. Setbacks, which are external problems, cause you to lose a part, the manual is wrong, your tools break, the system resists you. These frustrate you because they make the path harder, but they're not personal. The second are hang-ups, internal breakdowns, anxiety, ego, impatience, value, rigidity, or boredom. These are way worse because once you're in them, it feels like your whole mind is turning against you. You start making mistakes, you get angry, you sabotage your own progress. And then you say, I'm just not motivated anymore. But what you really lost was contact with quality. Pirsig doesn't offer hacks or hustle strategies. He offers something harder and deeper, care. He writes, to care about a motorcycle is to care about yourself. Peace of mind isn't just an emotion, it's a requirement for good work. The gumption you feel when something flows, that action is care. It's why you triple check your steps without being told. It's why you feel time disappear when something matters. It's why you get frustrated, not because that thing is broken, but because you want it to be right. This is a core part of Pirsig's message. Quality only exists when there's care. And the moment you stop caring, even subtly, you lose your access to quality. That's what gumption is pointing at. But there's a trap. Most people think gumption comes from results. They believe once this is finished, I'll feel good. Maybe once I get better at it, I'll care more. Or once it's recognized, it'll be worth it. But Pirsig flips that completely. He says results come from gumption, not the other way around. In other words, you don't care because something is going well. It goes well because you care. And if you try to trick the process by chasing rewards without caring about the work, you get junk results. Quality can't be faked. You can't coast into gumption. You have to re-engage. Pirsig never turns this into a listicle, but he does describe very clearly how gumption is regained. The first step is by naming the trap. Just noticing I'm in a gumption trap is powerful. It breaks the illusion that something's wrong with you. Instead of spiraling, you start observing. As you tell yourself, I'm being impatient. This is anxiety, not reality. I'm rushing because I want it to be done, not because I'm doing good work. That awareness puts you back in contact with the moment. The second step is to recontact the work. Return to the thing itself, not the goal. Clean your tools, look at the machine, reread your notes. Think about the actual problem and what it could be, and not what it means about you. This is Pirsig's way of saying that come back to quality. Don't muscle through, just reconnect. The third, accept the slowness. Often gumption is killed by a false timeline. In your head, you could picture that something could take only 20 minutes, or I shouldn't be stuck here, or I already fixed this once, why is it back? But machines and life don't care about your schedule. Pirsig says peace of mind requires giving up artificial agency. Because when your timeline is fake, your attention becomes fake. And fake attention kills gumption. This isn't about bikes. Gumption traps show up in creative work, relationships, learning, and health. In all cases, the resolution is the same. Return to the work, return to the moment, and return to care. If you do that, gumption rebuilds itself. And once gumption returns, so does flow. So does clarity, so does peace of mind. Pirsig makes one more radical claim here. Gumption is spiritual. Not religious, not mythical, but spiritual in the sense that it connects your deepest values to your smallest actions. When you have gumption, the work stops being separated from you. And that's when you start doing work that is actually alive. The fourth lesson is maintenance as philosophy. It explains what a machine can teach you about peace. Most people treat maintenance like punishment, something you have to do after the fun part is over, something beneath you or outside your real purpose. Robert Pirsig didn't see it that way. To him, maintenance wasn't a chore, it was a spiritual practice. Not because it's fun, but because it's the only way to stay in contact with reality. In fact, the way you approach maintenance of a motorcycle, a home, your body, your work, relationships, it's a direct reflection of your attitude towards life. Pirsig tells the story of John Sutherland, his travel companion who owns a beautiful BMW motorcycle. But the moment it starts acting up, John shuts down. He refuses to look at the engine, refuses to learn how it works. He gets visibly uncomfortable when the narrator even brings up mechanical issues. Instead, he says, I just want to ride. I didn't sign up to be a mechanic. But Pirsig sees what's really going on. What he really hates is the whole idea of technology. It's not because he's dumb, but because, like many people, he sees the mechanical world as cold, lifeless, and impersonal. Something you outsource, something you endure. To the romantic mindset, maintenance is what ruins the magic. You say to yourself, let me feel something, let me go fast, let me be free. Just not responsible. But when the engine breaks and now John is helpless, he can't ride, he can't fix it, he can't explain it. He's dependent and angry about it. That's the danger in refusing to engage with systems. When they fail, you collapse. When they need you, you resent them. When you finally act, it's out of panic, not understanding. Pirsig isn't mocking John, he's diagnosing a cultural wound. We became so alienated from the systems we rely on, we treat them like strangers. Now, contrast that with the narrator. He also rides, he also feels joy. But when the bike starts making a strange noise, he listens. When something seems off, he stops. He pops the cover, checks the wiring. He runs through hypothesis. Not because he's trying to win, but because he sees the machine as an extension of himself. He knows how it works, he's curious about it, he respects it. That's what makes him free. The one who knows how to fix motorcycles with quality is less likely to run short of friends than one who doesn't. Not because it's about being useful, but because competence breeds trust in yourself and in others. And that trust comes from engaging with reality. At its core, maintenance teaches attention. If you're not listening, you miss the early signals. Patience, if you rush, you strip a bolt or break something worse. Humility, machines don't care about your assumptions. They work how they work. Fourth, presence, you can't half fix something and expect it to run clean. And the fifth and final is discipline. You must show up, especially when it's inconvenient. None of these are technical traits, they're psychological, which is why Pirsig calls maintenance a form of peace. Quote, peace of mind isn't superficial or passive, it's the result of a personal understanding of how the machine works. Unquote. This applies just as much to a relationship, a business, or your own body. If you don't maintain what matters, it breaks. If you avoid friction, the failure just becomes more dramatic later. Maintenance is love expressed as precision. Pirsig gives a spiritual insight to this. Quote, the Buddha resides quiet as comfortably in the circuits of a digital computer or the gears of a cycle transmission as he does at the top of a mountain. End quote. He's not being cute. He means it literally. You don't find peace by escaping friction. You find it by moving towards the point of contact. The machine isn't sacred because it's spiritual. It's sacred because you bring presence to it. The grease, the tools, the checklist, all becomes a meditation when you care enough to show up. That's what Pirsig calls the Zen. The moment when subject and object are no longer split. When there's no you and the machine, just the task, done with quality. Most people think freedom is escape. Pirsig flips it. Freedom is understanding. Understanding how your system works, understanding what it needs, understanding your role in it is survival. Because the truth is, no system maintains itself. Everything requires upkeep. And the sooner you accept that, the more peaceful your life becomes. Caring for the machine is caring for yourself. The real cycle you're working on is the cycle called you. In Lesson 5, it offers the real path to insight. And it focuses on stuckness and surrender. There's a moment every builder, artist, or problem solver knows. You're working on something, it's going well, and then suddenly everything freezes. Nothing makes sense, every option seems wrong, the path forward disappears. Pirsig had a word for that state, stuckness. But unlike most people, he didn't treat stuckness as failure, he treated it as sacred. On the surface, stuckness is simple. You're not trying to solve a problem, no solution works, time moves, but the problem doesn't. But under the surface, Pirsig saw something much deeper. Stuckness is the moment when your current worldview stops working. Your assumption no longer apply. Your standard tools fail you and no amount of logic gets you through it. This is where most people panic. They double down on control, force solutions, and blame others or themselves. But Pirsig says, quote, this is the point where most real growth begins. In the book, Pirsig tells the story of a student who can't write her essay. The topic is the United States. She froze, too big, too vague, no angle. So he tells her, narrow it to Boozman. Still stuck. Narrow it to Main Street. Still stuck. Finally, he says, quote, write about the front of the building on Main Street. Quote, suddenly, she starts typing like crazy. She's been stuck not because she didn't care, but because her frame was too wide. That's the trap. We try to solve problems using frames too big or fixed or too familiar. Stuckness forces us to let those things go. When you're stuck, your first instinct is to think harder, but that's the problem. Pirsig writes, quote, the solution all seems obvious once you have them, but the getting to them is a process of dropping old ways of seeing. Quote. In other words, more logic doesn't always help, because the mind that got you stuck can't imagine what outside its own batteries. So the harder you press, the tighter the trap feels. Stuckness isn't a technical block. It's an identity crisis in disguise. This is where Pirsig says something most people don't want to hear. The best way to get unstuck is to stop trying to get unstuck. That doesn't mean quitting. It means surrendering your ego's grip on the problem. Let go of the timeline, assumptions, the identity that says, I should already know this. Instead, sit with the problem. Look at it, literally. Watch your thoughts swirl and let them settle. Eventually something shifts. A detail stands out, a new question appears, a solution floats up, quiet, small, and unexpected. That's not failure, that's contact. At this point, Pirsig wants to focus on the power of humility. Pirsig once got stuck on tuning his motorcycle. Every adjustment made the engine worse, every fix backfired. He kept forcing it until finally he sat back and realized he was adjusting the wrong part of the machine. He'd made a false assumption early on, and all his thinking was built on it. It wasn't until he stopped doing that he could finally see that's the move. From control to humility, from knowing to observing, from ego to attention. The reason stuckness hurts isn't because you're stalled. It's because it feels like a personal failure. But Pirsig destroys that myth. Stuckness isn't the opposite of progress. It's the precondition to real learning. It's the moment when your system breaks just enough to let it become something bigger. But only if you don't run. Only if you stop pretending you're above it. Every time you get stuck, something is being revealed. Maybe you don't know what you thought you knew, or maybe your expectations were false, or even maybe your attachment to being right is blocking something deeper. In all cases, stuckness is asking you, can you pause your ego long enough to see what's actually there? That's why Pirsig calls it sacred. Not because it feels good, but because you can't fake your way through it. It forces you to meet reality on its terms. So what does any of this have to do with quality? Everything. Because quality only shows up when your mind gets out of the way. And the best way to get the mind out of the way is to let it get stuck. Pirsig calls it the knife's edge. The point between too much structure and too much chaos, between knowing and not knowing, between the urge to act and the willingness to wait. And he says, quote, it's at this point that the good ideas start to appear. In the next lesson, we meet the person who couldn't stop thinking, who followed every stuck moment all the way to the edge of reality. His name was Phaedrus, and he's the reason this book exists. Lesson 6 gives insight on what happens when you think too clearly. And he explains this using an example of the ghost of Phaedrus. So far, the narrator has been guiding us gently, carefully through philosophical questions. What is quality? What happens when we lose it? And how do we live better? But all along, there's been another voice under the surface. A darker voice, sharper, colder, much more intense. That voice is Phaedrus. Not a metaphor, not a character. Phaedrus is the narrator's former self. A man who chased truth so hard that it broke him. He was brilliant, intellectually gifted, a child prodigy. He finished high school at 14, studied biochemistry and then philosophy. But he didn't just study questions, he obsessed over them. He wanted absolute truth, not just explanations, but foundations. And one day he asked, what is quality? And he didn't stop. At first, Phaedrus tried to find a definition. He read the Greeks, he studied logic, he analyzed how people judged art, speech, mechanics, and meaning. But no matter how far he went, he couldn't find a foundation that wasn't circular. Definitions lead to more definitions. Reason collapse into subjectivity. Objectivity collapse into assumption. So he did what most philosophers wouldn't dare. He said none of it was working. He began to believe that the entire structure of Western rational thought, from Aristotle through academia, was built on a mistake that had separated mind from body, person from purpose, truth from value. and the only way to fix it was to go back before the split, before logic and feeling were pulled apart, before subject and object, back to quality. Phaedrus's method was razor sharp, literally. Pirsig describes it as the knife of reason. He cut every idea into smaller pieces. He dismantled arguments down to the root. He broke apart every assumption, including his own. At first, this was thrilling, then it became terrifying. Because as he kept cutting, he found there was nothing left. No self, no certainty, and no floor. The knife was too sharp, and eventually it turned on him. Quote, his real victim, Pirsig writes, was himself. Eventually, Phaedrus stopped speaking. He stopped responding to people. He stopped functioning in the world. He was committed to a mental institute and subjected to electroshock therapy. And then he woke up. He was no longer Phaedrus. Quote, they said they had given me a new personality. The narrator recalls, quote, what they should have said is that they had killed the old one. Quote, the man who speaks in this book is what's left. Someone who remembers fragments of Phaedrus but doesn't fully understand him. And now, as he rides across the country with his son, those memories are surfacing. You could ask, why does Pirsig just tell us this up front? Why give us this ghost halfway through the book? Because Phaedrus isn't a twist, he's a consequence. The logical endpoint of pure rational pursuit with no human grounding. He's what happens when you replace care with abstraction, you isolate value from life, you demand an answer from a question that must remain alive. The narrator feels Phaedrus' presence growing stronger and deeper. He goes into the metaphysics. He says it's like being haunted, because it is. Phaedrus isn't gone, he's just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to finish what he started. What this ghost reveals is Phaedrus may be gone, but his insights remain. He's the one who realized that quality can't be defined without killing it, that reason isn't neutral, it has values buried inside of it, that culture's split between art and engineering is artificial, and that care, attention, and presence are more foundational than logic. He failed not because he was wrong, but because he had no system to hold the truth that he found. He needed integration, compassion, flexibility, connection, but all he had was the knife. So the narrator now walks the same path, but more gently, listening, writing, teaching, letting Phaedrus speak, but not letting him take over. Pirsig's message isn't don't think too hard. It's thinking without grounding will eat you alive. You can be right and still go mad. You can discover something profound and be incapable of living with it. The narrator's journey is not to resurrect Phaedrus, but to reintegrate him, to accept the part of himself that seeks truth, but to pair it with care, to feel quality again, not just define it. That's what this motorcycle trip is really about. So in the next lesson, we'll go deeper than Western philosophy was willing to go. We'll look at the metaphysics Phaedrus discovered before he collapsed, a complete reordering of reality, not in terms of subject and object, but in terms of quality as the root of both. In lesson 7, Pirsig reframes reality. At this point in the book, we've crossed the threshold. We've gone from a motorcycle trip to a philosophical breakdown, to the ghost of a man destroyed by his own questions, and now we arrive at the idea that haunted him, what Pirsig called the metaphysics of quality. This wasn't a metaphor, it was a serious philosophical system, one Phaedrus believed could replace the old subject-object framework of Western thought. It sounds abstract, but it affects everything, what you value, how you make decisions, and how you interpret the world. And it begins with one claim. Quality is not a property of things, it's the source of things. We'll start with what Pirsig was trying to overthrow. In traditional philosophy, subjects are minds, objects are things, and knowledge is what happens when subjects observe and describe objects. This is the lens of science, education, even most psychology. But Pirsig saw a fatal flaw. This model treats value, what matters, as secondary. He treats beauty, intuition, care, meaning as side effects of perception, not the source of it. Pirsig says that's backwards. He writes, quality is the event at which the subject becomes aware of the object. It comes before analysis, before identity, and before experience split into me and the world. So instead of subject-object metaphysics, Pirsig offers something older and deeper, a metaphysics of quality, where the fundamental structure of reality isn't matter or mind, it's value. But if quality is the foundation, what kind of things is it? Pirsig breaks it into two modes. The first, dynamic quality. This is the living edge of experience. It's spontaneous, immediate, and undefinable. It's the aha moment, the creative leap, and the sense of this is right before you know why. Pirsig says, quote, dynamic quality is the force of change. It cannot be defined, it can only be recognized. Quote, it's what makes life not just a pattern, but alive. The second is static quality. This is what happens after dynamic quality appears. You take the insight, you stabilize it, you write it down, build a habit, form a rule, and pass it on. Static quality is traditional, technique, systems, culture. It's what allows ideas to endure. It's also what makes them rigid. Without static quality, there is no memory, no structure, and no transmission of wisdom. Without dynamic quality, there's no freshness, no growth, no evolution. Static quality preserves, dynamic quality innovates. The key isn't to pick one, it's to balance them. Pirsig's argument is that culture dies when it worships static quality and forgets how to change. And individuals collapse when they chase only dynamic quality and lose structure. A healthy life, a healthy society, and a healthy mind all require both. Let's say you write something brilliant off the top of your head. That's dynamic quality. But then you edit it, give it structure, make it readable. That's static quality. Or maybe you have a realization during a walk that your job is killing you. That's dynamic. Then you map out a transition plan. That's static. Or you fall in love. That spark, that's dynamic. But building a relationship, routines, trust, and communication, that's static. You need both. Dynamic makes it meaningful, static makes it last. Without that balance, you either burn out or you stagnate. So Pirsig goes even further. He claims that evolution is not random mutations plus survival, as science says. It's dynamic quality being locked in by static structures. So you could see this like a new trait appears, that'd be dynamic. If it fits and it survives, that'd be static. So over time, systems of increasing quality emerge. This flips the script on traditional materialism. It says that value, not matter, is the primary mover. The universe is not just atoms reacting, it's a living process of quality unfolding. That's why people feel when something is right, even before they can explain it. Because quality isn't a feeling about reality, it is reality. Phaedrus saw this. He couldn't handle it. Because if this was true, then logic isn't king, definitions aren't fixed, you can't rest on authority or certainty, and you can't even trust truth unless it aligns with quality. He saw that the entire Western tradition, especially Aristotle's division of form and substance, had severed reality from value. He tried to reconstruct it all from the ground up, but he didn't have a container. He didn't have a community. He didn't have anything to hold on to once the static system fell away. So he fell with them. Unlike Phaedrus, the narrator doesn't try to dominate the metaphysics. He listens to it. He lets it unfold gradually through maintenance, through parenting, through memory. He doesn't force definitions by cutting too deep. He walks the knife's edge between rigid thought and chaotic intuition. And that's the difference between collapse and integration. Pirsig's metaphysics isn't just about how the world works. It's about how you relate to it. You tell yourself, I can do this, that's that, this means X. Or you can live in a quality world. and tell yourself, is this alive? Does this feel right? Am I in touch with the things itself? In a subject-object world, you master life by defining and controlling. In the quality world, you engage life by caring and perceiving. One seeks power, the other seeks peace. Lesson 8 is on the Church of Reason. Before Robert Pirsig broke from academic philosophy, he tried to work inside it. He was a professor, he taught rhetoric and composition, and like most good teachers, he wanted to help students actually think. But what he found was disturbing. Even the students who followed all the rules, who wrote clean papers, cited sources, followed structure, still didn't understand something. They had technique, but no contact. They were doing what Pirsig later called surface writing, words without soul. And the deeper he looked, the more he saw this wasn't just a classroom problem, it was a cultural religion. He called it the Church of Reason. The Church of Reason isn't a literal church. It's a mindset, a worldview, a system of assumptions baked into modern life. It teaches that truth must be objective, logic is the highest virtue, and feelings are suspicious, the individual is separate from the system, and value is either measured or irrelevant. This worldview runs most of academia, science, policy, and business. It also kills quality because it treats value as an option, because it treats value as an output, not a starting point. It says, quote, do the method right and meaning will follow. Pirsig says no, it's the reverse. Later in the book, Pirsig goes even further. He stops giving grades. He tells students they'll get an A if they just show up and do the work. The result, some panic, others disengage, but a few finally start to write with depth. Because when the external rewards disappear, the only motivation left is care. And that's what school has been stripping away. Pirsig writes, grades don't measure quality, they destroy it. They replace intrinsic connection with extrinsic fear. They make students chase approval instead of truth. And over time, students stop learning and start complying. Pirsig makes a radical analogy. He says a university is like a church, not because it's religious, but because it claims to represent something higher, a commitment to truth, the sacred standard of inquiry, and a transmission of cultural wisdom. But when the university loses its center, when it becomes about bureaucracy and branding or obedience, it becomes a shell. The building stays, the rituals stay, but the spirit is gone. The Church of Reason has its sermons, lectures, its clergies, professors, its dogma, syllabi, its punishments, grades, and its saints, peer-reviewed journals. But it often forgets its God, the pursuit of real living quality. This isn't just about education. This is about how people evaluate art and how companies evaluate work, how people judge others' intelligence. We've built entire systems around the appearance of reason, the right credentials, the right language, the right style, but not the right substance. Pirsig's war with the university wasn't about rebellion, it was about integrity. He saw that students were being trained not to think but to perform, and that performing logic without living quality was dangerous because it teaches you to trust systems more than yourself. Pirsig writes, quotes, when quality is subtracted from a structure, all that remains is bureaucracy. That's why people hate institutions, but still obey them. They feel the deadness, but they don't know where else to go. So they keep chasing degrees, promotions, credentials, hoping to feel alive. And they don't realize the thing they're chasing is missing. It was never baked into the system. It was carried in by the people who still cared. You can't mass produce quality. You can't measure it with grades, awards, or likes. You can only cultivate it by noticing, caring, and engaging the things directly. That's what school was supposed to teach, and that's what the Church of Reason has forgotten. In the next lesson, we turn to the thing that replaced real understanding, technology, and why most people's relationship to it reveals something much deeper: alienation from the world, from each other, and from themselves. Lesson 9 dives into what you're really afraid of when the car won't start. Most people think they don't understand technology. Pirsig says that's not true. The real problem isn't ignorance. The problem is fear. Fear of appealing incompetent or feeling stupid or what it reveals about your dependence. But more than anything, fear that technology reflects you back to yourself. And if you don't like what you see, it's easier to call the machine the enemy. Earlier in the book, Pirsig rides with his friend John, who owns a beautiful BMW. But every time it starts making strange noises, John shuts down. He just wants to ride. To John, talking about the machine ruins the experience. It's not that he's dumb. It's not that he sees machines as ugly, soulless, or lifeless. He associates them with stress, bureaucracy, and malfunction. He says, I don't want to mess with it. I just want it to work. Pirsig says, that is the first symptom of alienation. Alienation isn't confusion, it's disconnection. A belief that something essential in your world is foreign to you. It feels like you live inside systems you can't influence, or the tools you use don't belong to you, or your daily reality is built by people you'll never meet and don't trust. In short, you feel like a stranger in the world that sustains you. Pirsig says this feeling is so common, most people don't question it. They just cope. They outsource their problems and complain when things break, or treat complexity as somebody else's job. But underneath that avoidance is something deeper, a refusal to engage with the structure of your own life. Pirsig says the engine isn't the problem. Your relationship to the engine is the problem. If you avoid it, you'll fear it. If you fear it, you'll hate it. And if you hate it, you will avoid it more. It becomes a loop. But when you engage with the machine slowly, attentively, you start to notice something surprising. It's not lifeless, or it's not cold. It's precise. Every piece has a role. Every system tells a story, and every error teaches you something. If you listen closely, the machine will meet you halfway. Pirsig writes, quote, you look at where the trouble is, and the machine talks to you, quote. You start to trust yourself, stop seeing tools as threats, and stop blaming complexity for your discomfort. This is how alienation begins to heal. Most people think technology killed beauty, that it's made life sterile, fast, and artificial. But Pirsig says that only happens when we refuse to see the beauty inside the structure. We separate art and engineering and made tech something practical, soulless, or just a tool. We created a split. Poets on one side, programmers on the other. And then we told each side the other was wrong. But the Greeks didn't do that. To them, the technology, the root of it meant craft, art, knowledge, and it was sacred. The alienation came later when we stopped seeing structure as beautiful. Pirsig makes a distinction between the technician who follows procedures without understanding and the mechanic who listens, adapts, and feels the machine. Both can fix a problem, but only one is the relationship with the tool. That's the difference between automation and presence. One says, tell me what to do. The other says, let me understand what's wrong. Alienation thrives when we reward the technician and ignore the mechanic. This isn't just about machines. Think about a job you might not understand, or a bank system that confuses you, or a legal process that intimidates you, or maybe a health condition explained in jargon. When systems become opaque, we become passive. And when we're passive, we become resentful. Pirsig's solution isn't to reject the system, is to re-enter it with curiosity and patience. He writes, quote, the way to solve the conflict between human values and modern technology is not to run from technology. It is to break it down, look at it, and use it in a way that's in quality. Pirsig's message isn't learn how to fix your car. It's don't be a stranger in your own world. Because every time you avoid complexity, you lose trust in yourself. And every time you engage with it, really engage, you reclaim a piece of your agency. The machine doesn't make you powerless. Alienation does. The final lesson is about integration. By now, we've seen the split from every angle: romantic versus classical, feelings versus logic, care versus control, John versus the narrator, and the narrator versus Phaedrus. But this final chapter isn't about conflict. It's about something quieter and harder, something that doesn't come through force or clarity: integration. The moment when all the parts stop pulling against each other and finally begin to work together. For most of the book, Phaedrus has been a ghost, a name spoken in fear, a past self the narrator refuses to acknowledge. He says, "I don't remember much of what happened before the treatment. I've been trying to forget Phaedrus." But the road keeps bringing him back. With every mile, Phaedrus rises, not as an idea, but as a presence. The narrator begins to remember what Phaedrus believed, what he suffered, why he collapsed. And slowly he stops resisting. He realizes the only way to move forward is to stop rejecting who he used to be. The narrator doesn't become Phaedrus again. He doesn't resurrect the knife or retreat into pure logic. What he does is harder. He learns to carry Phaedrus without being consumed by him. He takes the insight, but without the rigidity. And he keeps the truth without the obsession. He integrates the parts of himself that were once at war. And in doing so, he models what the entire book is about: not choosing between structure and soul, not swinging between rebellion and obedience, but finding the quiet discipline of attention, care, and balance. Pirsig writes, quote, "The real cycle you're working on is a cycle called yourself." Quote, "All along, the motorcycle was a mirror. The engine repairs equal internal reflection. The maintenance equals presence. The travel equals process. The breakdowns equals stuckness. The tuning equals self-integration." By the end of this trip, it's not just the machine that is running better. It's the narrator and the relationship with his son and the story itself. Everything fits, not perfectly, but with enough quality to hold. Throughout the trip, the narrator's relationship with his son Chris has been distant, uncertain. Chris senses something is wrong. He asks about Phaedrus. He asks if his dad is okay. But as the narrator begins to integrate himself, Chris begins to trust him. In his final moments, Chris asks, "Did you ever really see ghosts?" And the narrator says, "Yes, I think I have." It's not a horror story, it's a release. Chris smiles, he feels safe, and he feels seen. And for the first time in the book, the narrator is fully present with himself and his son and with the road. That's what integration looks like. Not triumph, not finality, just the parts fitting. Pirsig never gives a list of steps. He never says this is how to live. But in his last few pages, he makes something very clear. The good life isn't made of abstract ideals. It's made of attention to your tools, your thoughts, the people in front of you, and the things you're building. He writes, quote, "The place to improve the world is first in one's own heart and head and hands, and then you work outwards from there." It doesn't mean solving everything. It doesn't mean arriving. It means this: you no longer run from complexity, no longer escape into abstraction. You face what's in front of you with care. That's the way of quality. And once you feel it, even for a second, you realize you've been riding towards it the whole time. So what is this book really about? At the start of the video, we said this book wasn't really about Zen, and it wasn't really about motorcycles. So what's it about? It was about a man trying to hold himself together in a world that kept pulling him apart. A world that said logic and feeling can't coexist, work and meaning can't overlap, systems can't be beautiful, and attention doesn't matter unless it's efficient. Pirsig refused all of that. He chased one question: what is quality? Until it shattered his personality. And then he spent the rest of his life trying to put it back together. Not by choosing a side, but by learning how to live with both. You don't need to ride motorcycles. You don't need to understand metaphysics. You don't even need to care about philosophy. But you do need to make something work. A relationship, job, a practice, a system. And when it breaks, you have a choice. Blame the machine or pay attention. Most self-help books give you steps. Pirsig gives you a mirror. What you see in it depends entirely on how closely you're willing to look, not just at your results, but at your care, your presence, gumption, and your willingness to maintain what matters, even when nobody's watching. Because that's what quality is, a relationship between you and your work, held together by how much you care. This book doesn't want to pump you up. It wants to teach you how to stay sane in a world that makes no sense, to stay connected when you feel split, and to do good work when nobody's grading you, and to find peace not by escaping the machine, but by learning how to listen to it. You don't need to disappear to find peace. You just need to care right here at the cutting edge of now.